Good afternoon. Let's start with that breaking news from Liverpool. A 14-year-old boy found guilty of the murder of schoolgirl Ava White. The 12-year-old was stabbed while out with friends in Liverpool in November last year. We can go live to Becky Cotterill, who's at Liverpool Crown Court, to tell us more. Becky?
Yeah, it was an extremely emotional moment in court when that verdict was read out, a guilty verdict for murder. Her family and friends, Ava's family, they screamed, they were crying. There's been a large group of family and friends here throughout this trial. This is the verdict they've been hoping for, and you could see the relief, her mum shaking as that verdict was read out. It took the jury just over 2 hours to reach a guilty verdict for murder. Ava White was stabbed in the neck in November 25th. She was in town with friends for the turning on of the Christmas lights. And we were told throughout the trial about the events that led up to her being stabbed. She had been in town with her friends and they bumped into another group, the defendant's group of friends. He is a 14-year-old boy that we cannot name for legal reasons. And a dispute had broken out because the defendant and his friends were filming Ava and her group. They were kind of mucking about, lying on the floor, having a good time. They didn't like the fact that they were being filmed. They'd asked the defendant and his friends to delete that footage. And that is where the conflict had broken out. Now, the defendant had admitted to possessing a knife, but he had said that he had stabbed Ava in self-defense. Now, clearly, the jury didn't believe that, and that's why they found him guilty of murder. And throughout this trial, we've been shown CCTV footage of the events that night, including the moment that Ava was stabbed. She was taken to hospital afterwards, but died from her injuries. And the prosecution characterising how that defendant, that 14-year-old boy, had behaved afterwards. They said at best he was utterly unconcerned, and at worst he was quite pleased with himself because he felt big. Now, the defendant appeared throughout this trial via video link. He can't be named for legal reasons, and he was able to appear remotely because of his age. When that verdict was read out in court, he put his head in his hands, and he stayed with his head in his hands for quite a while. The prosecution said during the trial that he had covered up his tracks by lying about his whereabouts that night, denying that he was even there, concealing evidence, including the coat that he was wearing, and trying to blame someone else before finally admitting that he had been there and admitting that he'd stabbed Ava. And we were shown hours of CCTV, and that is something that the CPS, when I spoke to them earlier, talked about, the kind of difficulty in going through all this CCTV to present it to the court. The CPS also spoke about the tragic nature of this case, the fact that the defendants are so young. And here is Claire Ciccone from the CPS. This is what she told me earlier.
I think the worrying thing for people dealing with this case was the age of the victim and the age of the defendant, but also that there were a number of other children present during the incident, so it was a massive concern. It's obviously had devastating effects for everybody involved.
And that's what the CPS were really keen to talk about, the devastating impact on this case, obviously primarily on Ava's family, but also on the children who witnessed the events that night, and of course on the defendant himself. He is just a 14-year-old boy, and I know that Ava's family have been very keen to talk about knife crime in the past, but that is the thing to take away from this, the fact that a 14-year-old boy was in town with a knife and a 12-year-old girl was stabbed to death.
Becky, it's utterly tragic. Becky Cotterill, thank you.